All right, hi everyone, how's it going? And welcome to another video. Now, today I want to do a video on the pros and cons of substitute teaching. This is definitely something I've been wanting to do a video on for some time now. So I'm going to start off by talking about the pros of substitute teaching. Then I'm going to talk about the cons. I'll talk about some of the negative aspects of substitute teaching as well. But the first thing I want to bring up in terms of the pros of substitute teaching would be the flexibility. That would be number one. That's definitely a pro. Now, substitute teaching gives you a flexibility that is really second to none. Most other jobs don't have that kind of flexibility. I mean, with substitute teaching, if you don't want to go into work one day, you simply don't have to. If you would want to maybe go on a vacation and you have the funds to do it, and it's the middle of the school year, you can do that. Substitute teaching is that flexible. I really can't think of too many other jobs with that level of flexibility. Maybe jobs like Uber or Lyft or DoorDash, maybe those jobs also have the flexibility. But I know when I go to different schools and I talk to other substitute teachers and the question arises, so why do you substitute teach? Substitute teachers will usually say, well, it's the flexibility, because you do have a flexibility with substitute teaching, like I said, that you simply don't have with other jobs. I know you could also do, seasonal work. That's something I've been doing for the past few years, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I had a regular full-time job. I simply wouldn't have that level of flexibility. I've been working in CRM archaeology. My bachelor's degree was in anthropology, which I don't think I've ever actually mentioned. But if I were to try to do that with a different job, I probably wouldn't be able to, because they probably wouldn't give me a month off or 2 months off, or 3 months, whatever it is. But with substitute teaching, you could do something like seasonal work, no problem. So, yeah, flexibility would be number one. Number two would have to be the fact that if you don't want to go work at a certain school for whatever reason, maybe you had a bad day, you could go to another school. No problem in doing that. With most jobs, if you don't want to work at where you're working at, you're kind of stuck there. There's really nothing you can do about it. You just kind of have to suck it up and, go to work where you're working at. But with substitute teaching, if you don't want to work at a certain school, you simply don't have to go work there. I know even if you're like a regular teacher, and if you don't feel like teaching, class the next day, you kind of have no option. You have to go to the school and teach in your classroom. But like I said, with substitute teaching, you could go around to different schools. You have the option to do that. So that would definitely be number two for pros. Number three, I would say, would be, and this is a bit of a cliche, but June, July, and August. By that, of course, I mean you get the summers off. It's kind of a cliche. It's an old cliche. Teachers used to be asked the question, so why do you teach? And the funny response was, well, June, July, and August. So you do have the ability to take June, July, and August off. You could also, do seasonal work, like I'm saying, I have done. You could go on a trip. You could spend that time engaging in different hobbies or learn new skills, do different creative projects. I know a lot of people nowadays talk about the importance of work-life balance. I know that's a very big deal now. You hear people talk about this all the time, that people want that work-life balance to do the things that they want to do. Maybe, like I said, maybe it's learn new skills or engage in certain hobbies. You can do that with substitute teaching. You definitely have that work-life balance. The next pro would be that it is a job where you are thanked for doing the job. I know a lot of jobs, you go in there and you're just not thanked to do the job every day. You've probably heard the cliche, a thankless job. And there are jobs where, they don't thank you for working the job. Now, they shouldn't have to thank you, but with substitute teaching, usually you're thanked when you go into substitute teaching every day. They thank you for doing that, usually. And, they don't have to do that, but it is nice to be thanked. I know I've rarely had other jobs where I've been thanked for doing them. With the archaeology jobs that I've done, I have been thanked. And, like I said, they don't have to do that, but it is kind of nice that they do. So it is a job where you are thanked. Another pro to the job would be that you don't have to do all the lesson preparation and the planning and the grading that the regular teachers have to do. You don't have to do that when you're a sub. And to people who are not teachers, to people who, some people don't understand, that teachers really spend a lot of time and effort planning lessons, grading papers. Many hours outside of the classroom hours are spent doing these things, planning, preparing, grading. I know I talked to a teacher one time and she said that if her salary was spread out across all the hours that she worked, she'd probably make about $8 an hour because she was spending a lot of time outside of school working on preparing lessons and grading and all those other things. And a lot of times, like I said, people who are not teachers don't understand this. They don't understand all the planning and preparation that goes into, being a teacher, essentially. So as a sub, though, like I said, you don't have to do all that. So that would be another one of the pros. Another one would be that you do tend to get kind of a long break period throughout the day. Now, part of that is the prep period. Another part of that is a lunch. Usually comes out to be an hour and 45 minutes. Sometimes they won't give you the prep period, and you'll see on the lesson plan for the prep period, it'll say, see me. So you go down to the office and maybe they'll have you fill in for another teacher, or maybe they'll have you do office work. I do know some subs that don't like when schools do this. They want to have the whole hour and 45 minutes break because they expect that. They expect to get that. And I know there's some subs that just won't go to schools that don't give them the full hour and 45 minutes. So, yeah, that would be another aspect of it. I know that during the pandemic, I was substitute teaching online, and my dad saw the break that I got, and he was like, wow, that's really a cushy job you have there. Because, you do get a longer break than people would usually get during the workday. So, yeah, that would be another pro. Another pro would be that you actually can help the students. You actually can help the students, and you also do help the teachers. It is meaningful work. I know there are some jobs that are not meaningful. You're just kind of filling the slot. They don't have a lot of meaning to them. I know books have been written about these types of jobs. For whatever reason, they haven't done away with these jobs. They keep trying to fill these jobs, and there really isn't a whole lot of meaning behind them. But that's not the case with substitute teaching. It is a job with a lot of meaning. Next, I would have to say that the next pro would be that substitute teaching is a good job to have if you do lose your job. You know, you lost your job, maybe you were laid off, maybe you were fired, maybe you quit. It's usually relatively easy to get a job as a substitute teacher. It's usually pretty easy. And I would have to say that that's one of the pros. You know, if you lose your job, you can get a job relatively easy as a substitute teacher. Now, I'm going to talk about the cons. There certainly are some cons. Now, the first con has to do with the fact that when the teacher is not there, the students are just never going to be on their best behavior. That's just how it is. It's the nature of the job. When the teacher's gone and when there's a sub, the students are usually not on their best behavior. I have talked to people who have gone to Ivy League institutions, who have always done good in school their whole lives, and even they have told me that they have been disrespectful to substitute teachers sometimes. So, yeah, students are just not going to be on their best behavior when the teacher is absent. I know there have been times when I've substitute taught and I'm in the classroom and I'm looking out into the hall and I'll see a student walk by, or you'll see students walk by and they'll see you and they'll go, yes! You know, because they know they have a sub and they figure that maybe, you know, they might be able to goof around a bit. So that would definitely be one of the cons of substitute teaching. Now, sometimes, you know, a teacher maybe in the classroom next door will come in and try to get the students to calm down, maybe yell at them a bit, and maybe, you know, the students will then be calm for a bit. You know, that sometimes works. That's happened to me before. But yeah, students are just never going to be on their best behavior when the teacher is absent. Like I said, it's the nature of the job. Now, another con to substitute teaching would be the fact that it is a job where you always have that first day of work feeling every day. And, you know, I've been substitute teaching for years. I still get that first day of work feeling every day. It just never seems to go away. I mean, what it really is the fear of the unknown, because you simply do not know what you're walking into. And because you're not knowing what you're walking into, there is some anxiety there. Because, you know, you don't know what the class is going to be like. It's the fear of the unknown. And like I said, you get that first day of work feeling every day. And, you know, it just doesn't seem to go away. You can get used to it. And, you know, if you do sub a lot. But like I said, I've been subbing for years and I still get that first day of work feeling. It just doesn't seem to go away. Okay, the next con to substitute teaching that I do have to mention is that sometimes the teacher does not leave a lesson plan. I have had this happen to me before. Doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. I know there have been situations where the teacher would be out for maybe a week and they would have backup lesson plans, but sometimes if there was a sub before me, that sub may have already used the week of lesson plans, and then that sub is no longer there, then maybe, I would come in and there would no longer be any sub plan. So when that would happen, I would usually call the office. They would contact the teacher, and then maybe the teacher would email lesson plans. So, yeah, sometimes, they don't leave a lesson plan. They're supposed to leave a lesson plan. It's something they're supposed to do. Like I said, there usually are those backup lesson plans. It's just sometimes, like I said, there's someone who subbed before you. They may have already used those backup sub plans. So, yeah, that's another thing. The whole thing of, what do you do if there is no lesson plan left by the teacher? And yeah, usually, you can get through it. I know sometimes I have gone to the classroom like next door and have talked to the other teachers, and a lot of times, they will provide me with like a teacher's edition, and they'll just say, okay, have the students do this and this. They'll basically plan something for the students to do. That has happened before, and other teachers have usually been pretty helpful when you ask them for help. So now the next con is something that bothers some people. It's never really bothered me a whole lot, and some subs talk about not really feeling a part of the culture of the school. They don't feel like they're a part of like the whole system. They feel more like a temp. Now, this has never bothered me, but I have heard other substitute teachers talk about how they are bothered by this. They just don't feel like a full employee. Never been an issue with me, but I did feel like I should bring it up. Now, the next con that I'm going to talk about is something that used to be an issue in the past. It really isn't anymore. It used to be that substitute teaching was something that was very sporadic. You simply really couldn't do it every day because the district would call you, and they would call you, but oftentimes they wouldn't call you every day. Sometimes you would have to call the school, and as a result, substitute teaching was just something you couldn't do every day. Now, in recent years, they have implemented something called Frontline, which you could sign on or sign into from your phone or your computer, and then it will list all the jobs in the district you want to sub in. And if there's an opening, you just click on it, and you could go sub. I know where I sub in the Chicago Public Schools, there's usually an opening. It's usually not an issue by any means. You could usually find sub positions. You could pretty much sub every single day of the school year if you wanted to. So that used to not be the case. So that was a con in the past, and I did feel like I wanted to bring it up because it was a major issue at one point in time. It really isn't anymore. So, yeah, that would be another one of the cons. Now, another one of the cons that I want to mention in regards to substitute teaching would be the pay. Now, pay for a substitute teacher really depends on where you're substitute teaching. For example, if you're substitute teaching in New York or Los Angeles, you're going to get paid more. I've heard of substitute teachers getting paid $250 a day. Now, I substitute teach in the Chicago Public Schools, and they have different levels of pay. For example, if you have an associate's degree, or I think like 60 credit hours, the daily rate is $120 a day. If you have a bachelor's degree, it's $140. And if you have a bachelor's degree plus teacher certification, it's about $193 a day. Now, last year there was not a pay increase because of contractual issues and whatnot. I guess there are contract negotiations that were going on last year. I don't know if there's been a pay raise yet this year, but yeah, last year there was not. Also, last school year, they got rid of the incentive pay. Because of COVID, there was COVID relief money that the Chicago Public Schools got. They had gotten rid of that last year. So what the COVID relief money did was it created this incentive bonus. So if you substitute taught in the Chicago Public Schools 15 days in 1 month, you got $1,000 bonus. And like I said, they got rid of that last school year. There has been some talk of them possibly bringing that back. I don't really see them bringing that back unless they really need subs, because that is something that would get people to sub in the Chicago Public Schools more. Just having that incentive bonus, would definitely be something that would bring more people into the Chicago Public Schools as subs. So now, the next con that I want to mention would be the fact that some people feel that substitute teaching is not a real job. I have heard some subs talk about this. They get bothered by this. Again, this is one of those things that has never really bothered me, but I have heard substitute teachers talk about this kind of thing. I've heard them talk about, being bothered by it. I know with myself, I substitute teach, and I also do archaeology, and I know sometimes, people will be more interested to hear about, and they'll ask me more questions about the archaeology as opposed to the substitute teaching. And that, makes sense. The archaeology is just something that's more unusual, and people tend to have more questions about that kind of thing. So, yeah, those are the pros and cons of substitute teaching. I myself have generally liked substitute teaching for the most part. It's something I've done for a long time. I have done other stuff, like I've been a teacher's assistant. And I generally would say that I do prefer being a substitute teacher to being a teacher's assistant. But, nothing against teacher's assistants and teacher aides. If you're a teacher aide, more power to you. But I have been in situations where teachers have wanted me to be a teacher aide, but I like substitute teaching and prefer substitute teaching to teacher aiding, so I've gone with that. I've had to turn them down and say, I just like substitute teaching too much. But yeah, nothing against being a teacher's aide. So, yeah, I just wanted to talk about the pros and cons. I myself, I do have a teaching certificate. I did try to get a teaching job in my subject area, which is social studies and history, but I was unable to get it. I have student taught, so like I said, I do realize how much planning and preparation teachers do. So I wanted to do this video on the pros and cons so people are aware of it. Like I said, I have liked substitute teaching over the years. It can be a good job to have if maybe, like I said, lost your job and you need a job. Substitute teaching will at least pay the bills. It has definitely helped me out, and it's definitely paid my bills. I have been able to live off of it, and I'm not married. I don't have a wife and kids, so I don't have real high expenses, and it has definitely been a job that I've been able to live on. So that's all I've got. It's the pros and cons of substitute teaching. If you watched this video, as always, I thank you for watching. Now, I am planning on coming back with another video on the funny moments and funny stories from my years as a substitute teacher. I was going to add that into this video, but I decided I would make that a whole other video. So if you watched this video, as always, I thank you for watching. Have a good night.